All right, welcome everyone. I'm Greg Gershuny. I'm the Executive Director of the Aspen Institute's Energy and Environment Program. Our program explores significant challenges with diverse thinkers and doers to make a more prosperous, equitable, and sustainable society for all. We've been addressing and convening around critical energy, environmental, and climate change issues for more than 50 years. For those of you who are joining us for the first time today, our event is the third in a series focused on the future of cities and reimagining our urban epicenters to better serve both people and the planet. This series is in collaboration with Blueprint and Reef Technology, whose mission it is to connect the world to your block by transforming underutilized urban spaces into neighborhood hubs that connect people to goods, services, and experiences. We all have different ideas of what the future of cities may look like, from autonomous vehicles to green architecture to urban agriculture. Today, I'm looking forward to diving into the future of our energy system and what it'll take to power resilient cities for a decarbonized and climate resilient world. The conversations we're having here will help to inform a proposal of big ideas to shape and design our cities for the future of urban life. I'm pleased to introduce a fantastic lineup of panelists. Lauren Faber O'Connor is the Chief Sustainability Officer for the City of Los Angeles. Jon Wellinghoff is the CEO of Grid Policy and served as the Chairman of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission from 2009 to 2013. Nicole Sitaraman is the Vice President of Strategic Engagement at Sustainable Capital Advisors, and Galina Russell is the Chief Operating Officer of Reef Energy. If you have questions for the panel, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of Zoom if you're logged in. So Jon, let's start with you. You've served as the Chairman of FERC, as well as for a state PUC and as a state customer advocate. When you think about the electricity system of the future and how we're going to power our growing cities, especially in light of increasing extreme weather like hurricanes and fires and floods, how do you see the system evolving to ensure that we do our best on price, reliability, and environmental impacts?
Thanks, Greg, and thanks for having me here on this forum. I really appreciate it. Well, cities are going to be critical to that mission ultimately, and we're going to have to look at the city as a platform ultimately, and the platform of the infrastructure services that are delivered by the city to its citizens overall. Of course, there is the electric grid, the distribution system that may within a city be actually owned, operated, and maintained by a private for-profit company, or it could be owned by the city itself, or it could be a cooperative of the three different financial and ownership models that we currently have. But despite those models, the city, I think, has to view it as a platform and view it as a platform to provide for resilience and reliability for its citizens over time and over extreme events like the events that we saw in Texas that I know we're going to probably talk about a little bit later in our discussions. But having a platform like that, it's critical to look at how that platform can most effectively be used to provide those services. And one way to do that ultimately is look at the critical services in the city themselves, the fire services, the hospital services, the school services, and all those central hubs can actually be used as locations for microgrids, where we could ultimately have distributed energy to the neighboring areas around those critical services, but set them up as microgrids with the insurance that they can isolate if necessary if the rest of the grid is down, like we saw in Texas just 2 weeks ago, and as we saw in California this summer, where we had blackouts as well. We can't continue to ensure that we're going to have a large distributed either statewide or national system that's going to operate all the time. We have to have the reliance on these more distributed units, and the city is obviously one distributed unit, and there's also the subunits within the city, like these critical services that have to be kept up. For example, my daughter was in Austin, Texas during the blackout, and she had service the whole time because she was near a critical hospital that the city chose to keep that circuit on during that period of time. But we need to ensure that those circuits in those areas continue to maintain services over time. We need to look at not only the electric services, but other services that can help deliver energy. For example, water service within a city. There's mechanisms that you can put in to the water system, pressure letdown systems that can actually provide additional distributed energy services from just letting down pressure in the water system. So we have to look at these as integrated systems. The city has to look at them as platforms, and those platforms have to be used effectively to provide resilience and reliability.
Excellent. Thanks, John. The interconnections between electricity and water are so critical, and I think not talked about nearly enough. Now, Nicole, you've spent much of your career working on the deployment of clean energy. Earlier as Assistant People's Counsel representing DC electric customers, including me. And then later at Sunrun, deploying solar in the Mid-Atlantic area. And then last year you started at Sustainable Capital Advisors. How should we be thinking about financing the energy transition in cities in a way that can lead to better and more equitable outcomes?
Well, thank you for having me. First of all, Aspen Institute, Greg, and the team, really pleased to be here today. I firmly believe that we are at a phase now where kind of money and implementation are going to be key for facilitating a more equitable, climate resilient future for all communities. I work with Trent and Allen right now at the Sustainable Capital Advisors organization, and they're doing a lot of creative, wonderful thinking around innovative finance solutions that will both scale distributed energy resources at the level that we need to have a meaningful impact on decarbonization, but also thinking about these solutions in a way that will facilitate greater equity and racial justice, bringing in to the fold more communities of color who have been disproportionately impacted by our reliance on the traditional energy infrastructure, and creating jobs, creating pathways for entrepreneurship and wealth building in communities. There are actually a whole host of finance options that actually have been outlined in a report that Trenton and his team put together for Vote Solar only about 2 years ago, called the Inclusive Solar Finance Framework. I highly recommend that folks look at that report, which was also referenced in a recent paper called Solar with Justice that was put together by the Cummings Foundation and other partners. But we have to begin to think about kind of really massive investment in communities of color to redress historic harms to communities by our traditional energy infrastructure. I mean, we really have to take a minute to think about how our energy consumption, how our energy delivery system in cities has really facilitated a tale of two cities, really, related to redlining, discriminatory financing and housing practices in cities, and how that has kind of compounded a number of harms to communities of color, exacerbated by climate change, whether it be communities dealing with heat island effect, high energy burden, and the siting of energy infrastructure in their communities, such as peaker power plants. We need to think holistically about how we can accelerate finance solutions so that these communities can have a meaningful role in our climate resilience future.
Excellent. Thank you, Nicole. Now, Lauren, you live kind of on the front edge of clean energy transition in California. Your state's led the way in clean electricity, electric vehicles, and kind of more broadly on climate action. And your city of Los Angeles, where you're the Chief Sustainability Officer for Mayor Eric Garcetti, has really set the standard for large cities around the world. Can you talk a little bit more about how you've helped get the city to that point, and what are some of the best practices that you found in engaging communities that other cities might learn from?
Thanks, Greg. Thank you so much. It's so wonderful to be back with Aspen, and I really appreciate this series and appreciate and I'm humbled to be on the panel with such amazing thinkers and leaders in this space. I also really want to appreciate, John, what you said about the role of cities, because we would agree. And in fact, you know, LA is in a particularly unique position because, of course, second largest city in the United States, population of 4 million, with a municipal utility that is the largest municipally owned utility in the country. Just to take a step back, you know, in 2019, Mayor Garcetti released LA's Green New Deal, which was a, you know, kind of building off of his previous sustainable city plan from about 4 years prior to that, but really upping our game even beyond and recognizing the importance of accelerating our action, the urgency of climate change. And so every time we've looked at our goals, it has been in the name of acceleration. What can we be doing more? And how are we making sure that we're concentrating our efforts around justice, just as Nicole, you were saying, and that's really a key and core principle to LA's Green New Deal is urgency, and environmental justice, racial justice, inclusion in program development and implementation, and of course, an inclusive green economy around workforce. And that also has incredible equity implications. But then finally, that we have to lead by example, that we move forward and lead in every place that we can. We classify those as the 5 zeros: a zero carbon grid, zero carbon buildings, zero carbon transportation, zero waste, and zero wasted water. And a zero carbon grid underpins so much of all of the rest being successful. Our zero carbon transportation and buildings really depends on them plugging into a zero carbon grid, plugging into the sun and the wind. And so, as I said, we have a particularly unique opportunity and responsibility by owning and managing the largest municipal utility in the country. It doesn't just deliver energy. It isn't just about, as John, you were talking about, the distribution infrastructure for a city like Los Angeles. It's the generation assets, it's the transmission infrastructure. We own and operate all of it, and we operate the grid. We operate the Los Angeles grid. So you have all of California's grid and you have Los Angeles. And so we have to prove, and we're taking on the responsibility of proving that we can move to 100% renewable energy reliably and equitably and affordably, and we can keep the lights on 24/7. We can do that with renewable energy. And so what is our key way of doing that? It's certainly planning and analysis and modeling, but something that we're really excited about and really proud to be releasing formally in just a couple of weeks really now is the LA 100 study. And that is a multi-year partnership that we have had, that the city, the Department of Water and Power has had with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, the DOE National Lab, and partners throughout California to really study the pathways to 100% renewable energy. This is unprecedented. This is incredibly comprehensive. It's never been done before. It's never looked at what do you have to do to get to 100%, but also testing and understanding reliability and resilience in the face of climate change, in the face of the types of events that we need to know we can be resilient to in terms of grid reliability. So we're looking at all of that, and we're looking at what are the health and environmental justice implications, what are the job implications of meeting this criteria and getting to 100% renewable energy. And I got to tell you, it is extraordinarily exciting because the results are showing us that there are multiple pathways to getting there, and to getting there affordably, and to getting there in a way that maintains reliability. And that's what we're so excited to share. But to your question also about how can we be a model in terms of some of these planning and processes, not only is this template totally transferable to others, but a key part of the process was having a multi-stakeholder advisory group with us throughout the entire process that was made up of that was made up of local community representatives, environmental justice advocates, environmental advocates, clean tech, the local utilities around us, major customers throughout the city, ratepayer advocate, and rate hawks, everyone who is really looking at all the different components of a clean and well-managed power system have been along with us in an advisory group this entire time. I'm talking years, 2.5 years of work that we've continued even through the pandemic. We were meeting quarterly, and now through the pandemic, we've been meeting every month or sometimes sooner, just to go through so many different aspects of this analysis. We're talking millions of simulations to look at all of the ways to get there. And what it's showing is that we have to do everything. Everything is on the table when it comes to large scale, distributed transmission upgrades and new build, workforce training. There are so many no regrets. Start now. Doesn't matter which scenario you're going to pick. We need more renewables online. We need more storage. We need more distributed energy resources. We need, as I said, to be looking at permitting on and siting for transmission lines. We need to be looking at, and in particular, we need to be looking at new types of clean energy fuels, combustion for long duration power generation. So it's really demonstrating not only the immediate need to deploy more renewable energy, but also a significant RD&D agenda for those sort of last 10 years out, that's what I think is so exciting, is how much it's revealing to us. But that already, the city of Los Angeles the department is 38% renewable energy. And so we are well on our way. We've signed contracts last year, I guess I should say now, to add another 13% in solar storage and wind. So we are moving as quickly and as aggressively as possible. We put out a distributed energy resources request for proposals, an RFP. We want to bring more of that distributed, those microgrid opportunities, John, that you were talking about, into communities. This is specifically focused on disadvantaged communities in the city. And of course, deploying, which we can talk about later, deploying a number of low-income programs so that everyone can be brought with us in this transition and no one is burdened by the transition that we're making.
That's fantastic. And I think that speaks to what people call the gem of the United States, which is our national lab system, and in particular, NREL, who's done so much work on things like this over the last few years. Galina, you're an innovator working for an innovative company. REEF owns and manages thousands of parking lots and garages in hundreds of cities around the US. So how should city planners and energy developers and innovative companies think about utilizing spaces like this to come up with creative ideas for the most promising paths to decarbonize cities and increase reliability for the grid?
Thanks, Greg. First, I just want to take a moment to say that I'm also really honored and very excited to be a part of today's discussion, which of course, as folks mentioned, happens to sequence the recent unfortunate rolling blackouts in Texas. But even if we take a minute back before I get into the innovation piece, we've had, I think, a chance to catch our breath and reflect on the year 2020. And, what the pandemic has taught us, if anything, is that we've got some serious work to do as it relates to building resiliency in our lives. And I think one aspect of that that we tend to forget as a society is our grid, of course, happens to be one of the largest threats to the daily comforts of our routines. And it tends to be sort of a silent threat, right? Because most of us are generally unaware that just how far behind we are on modernization of our infrastructure and our sustainability initiatives. And it's not to take away from the progress that's been made, but I think we're still lagging a bit. And there's, of course, a variety of ways to sort of solve for this. As my fellow panelists have already mentioned, microgrid and formation of microgrids, and then having a network to connect those. is a great one. There's utility grade, projects for storage, right, to build in resiliency. But the one that I'm closest to, and we're closest to at REEF, being at the forefront of, bringing good services and experiences to communities at a very hyper-focused local neighborhood level, is being able to leverage that proximity to also view this problem of sustainability and resiliency from the lens of a single neighborhood, right? And then, solving for that and scaling that in a distributed manner across a network of locations. And why do we focus on a neighborhood or on a specific community as a grassroots approach? Is, we see that communities tend to have their own heartbeat. And I think this is especially true to what Nicole has mentioned in terms of equity and relationship to electricity access and sustainability for specific neighborhoods. I mean, simply put, access to a reliable power or clean air, may be far more scarce for folks in one part of the city versus another portion. So by and large, obviously, this is a discussion on resiliency and democratization of sustainability and electricity access, which can be done, with a variety of tools. And I think we're doing a great job. Utilities are taking a lead, and cities are taking a lead on doing this at grid scale solutions. But I think there's an even more efficient way, of being able to stack the deployment of a range of these sort of complementary distributed solutions, such as energy storage, battery energy storage systems, let's say, paired with electric vehicle charging stations, or battery energy storage systems paired with small generation at a community level, small renewable generation at a community level, or even, just the deployment of eco-friendly, let's say, last block logistics, right? And supporting that sort of 15-minute city concept where we don't need to have diesel trucks on the road, right? We can convert to sustainable transport a lot quicker. We've done this well with a partnership actually with DHL and eco-friendly e-cargo bike deliveries packages in last block deliveries. So tactically speaking, I think of this as drawing a map of the city and seeing that, the outskirts, let's say, get 30% or experience 30% more blackouts per year, right? While maybe another neighborhood is living in a luxury of getting to keep their lights on all day. And, we can take sort of that same map, right? And identify even, let's say, 50 underutilized urban spaces, parking lots, and place up to maybe 2 megawatts worth of storage capacity within each lot. That's 100 megawatts of backup power, and now a strong network of smart energy management that we can use to help redirect electricity and do this in a smart and more efficient manner. And in the case of clean transport, which of course plays a big role in decarbonization and our sustainability goals, this same network can now act as a network of capacitors for charging stations, right? It can act as a buffer in between the grid. So we don't necessarily need to wait for these large scale projects to happen. We can start, with the tools that we have today. And this is why I wanted to highlight this point of being able to do this from a neighborhood level distributed approach, starting small, but, being able to pick up momentum, right? And help to sort of speed up that transition, and doing it within close proximity of the communities that need it, right? And understanding each time that the needs of these neighborhoods are different, right? And the experiences of these neighborhoods are different. And I think, if we look at storage capacity growth in the US, it's been in the low single digits still year over year. And this is just a testament that we really need to, accelerate those efforts in each way possible. So as Lauren mentioned, everything's on the table, and I think the distributed method is one that can help us achieve speed. And so what does it take to sort of execute this? It's a greater, that multi-stakeholder collaboration that, Los Angeles is doing is a great example. I think that's wonderful, and more cities need to adapt to that, to bring stakeholders like us, right, that are at the forefront of doing this at a community level, and get that input and sort of work together to map and prioritize these pockets of vulnerability and their overall relationship, with our energy and sustainability ecosystem. And, you know, a big portion of this is also data transparency. And I know this is a rather controversial one, you know, transparency on utility data and grid capacity, but, you know, that level of transparency also helps us to, I think, solve a lot more proactively and get to market a lot quicker. So I'm sure we'll talk about, you know, the Texas blackouts shortly, but if anything, last week, I think, served yet as another reminder that, you know, building resiliency and supporting, you know, sustainability initiatives is really a center stage in our society at this time. And it's all hands on deck, because we're not, you know, we're not just in a place of building for the future. We're also having to catch up on all the lost momentum of the last half a century.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. So I could easily spend days and days and days with this group asking you all kinds of questions, and I have a whole bunch of questions I have, but I wanted to turn to a question that came in the Q&A. So we have Congressman Sean Casten, who represents the area just outside Chicago, on today. He asked a question for Jon, really about what should Congress or the White House, what can they do to help empower FERC, you know, to be able to achieve the things we need to achieve. And this is, you know, kind of the perfect confluence of, you know, the policymaker who has the power to make change. And Jon, you've spent a number of years at FERC and have that expertise. So I'm curious of your thoughts of what could be done, or what powers could be given to FERC that could help here.
Oh, well, I want to thank Sean for the softball. Hello, Sean. It's good to know you're out there. No, FERC, I think, can be a real partner with the cities and with communities to ultimately help empower them, and empower them in this sense. I want to sort of expand on something that Galina touched on, but I think is really important, and that is to the extent that we start enhancing neighborhoods, providing for reliability and resilience in areas of low-income neighborhoods and others that have been underserved, we have to remember that in doing so, that can provide reliability and resilience not only for those areas, but to the extent that there isn't stress on the grid, to the extent that we have sort of normal operations, those enhanced areas can also provide support for the larger grid and actually provide revenues back to help support the financing of those types of infrastructure into those neighborhoods. So what FERC can do is ensure that those areas have access to the larger wholesale grid and can provide wholesale energy services when they're capable of doing that. And if you can do that under things like FERC Order 2222 that has recently come out and is trying to enhance distributed energy, if you can do that, ultimately you have more financing capability to ensure that these neighborhoods can be supported and served.
May I touch on that, Greg?
Yeah, please.
I'm really glad that question was asked, and I just want to underscore what Jon was saying, and highlight that Congress has just now actually put a little extra pressure on FERC to ensure that communities are able to have a voice in the adjudicatory process at FERC. The Office of Public Participation has actually been statutorily required since the disco era, since the 70s, but was just, I believe, funded in this last COVID bill, I believe in December-ish. So that office is going to, if you know, rolled out properly in a way that really amplifies the voice of stakeholders, communities, neighborhood organizations, that I think that will have a real impact on things and the role of distributed energy resources moving forward at the commission. And also, you know, there's been a renewed pronouncement of commitment to consideration of environmental justice implications of applications and petitions placed before FERC. And Chairman Glick has been pretty emphatic about his commitment to that. And I believe that distributed energy resources, aggregated resources have a role to play in the environmental justice conversation. So I'm glad that question was asked. Just wanted to share that piece.
So I want to turn to Texas. Texas has been in the headlines the last couple of weeks. We've seen the news coverage of the humanitarian crisis. The extreme winter event that led to grid failure, I think that we've seen that repeated in other places over the last, decade and longer. So I want to get each of your thoughts on how cities like Austin, San Antonio, and others can make their systems more resilient, how we can protect ourselves against things like this. That, back in 2011, there was a FERC report about the cold snap then. I know when I was at the Department of Energy, we included a snippet from that report in the Quadrennial Energy Review, but things didn't actually happen on the ground. And so what can we do to help protect ourselves against events like this and other things like hurricanes and fires that can lead to that? Who wants to, anyone want to kick off with this one?
Sure. As you mentioned, I mean, I am in no place to lecture or wag a finger or tell anyone what they should or shouldn't be doing. However, I can tell you, the way we think about it in LA, and I have been talking with my counterparts in Houston and Austin, and the extraordinarily tough time they have been having. My counterpart and good friend in Houston, who I just feel like it was just a Sandy conversation all over again, and then you have this conversation, and then they just keep getting hit really hard. But it really brought me back to times that we've had. In 2019, we had the Saddle Ridge fire in Southern California, which took out 3 different transmission lines into the city of Los Angeles. And that curtailed thousands of megawatts of capacity that we have into the city, including many, many hundreds of megawatts of renewable energy. And it was there was thankfully like a pretty low demand day or a couple of days, but we look at a moment like that where we were within 100, 200 megawatts of not having enough power in Los Angeles. When you're talking about a daily load of, just for perspective, 100 megawatts, 200 megawatts, when we have a daily load of 31, 3,200 megawatts, that is pretty slim to think that we came all the way down to that in a moment like that. Cut to the year before, in 2018, over the 4th of July weekend, we had record-breaking heat, a complete crazy heat event that not only was it just unbearably hot, it was unexpectedly hot in the metro downtown areas of Los Angeles. So in terms of this unpredictability and needing to be ready for things that you wouldn't have necessarily planned for based on previous history, we're used to seeing the valley be the hot area. And don't get me wrong, it was 117 degrees in the valley. So yeah, it was really hot there, but it was 108 downtown. And it did not, it stuck around for a couple days. And so this was not a problem of having enough power for people who were trying to turn on their AC, if you're lucky enough to have AC. That was not the issue. The issue was infrastructure melting and just completely failing, freezing in Houston or in Texas and melting in Los Angeles. This was not about not having enough power. So when you think, and the department has really been thinking about staging its maintenance of infrastructure. It focused early on in the valley because that's where we have a lot of these events. But this was unexpected to see this kind of this kind of experience in the metro parts of the city. And so it really is reinforcing the importance of, and the $8 billion that we're spending just between a couple of years ago in 2022 in maintenance infrastructure, in infrastructure maintenance, I should say. It really underscores the importance of paying close attention to everything, the infrastructure that we have, the being prepared and doing the planning, and of course, having a portfolio of resources. We have significant resources inside the city and significant resources outside the city. And both of those play a really important role. But one of the things that, you know, is reinforced by even this LA 100 study that I was referencing is the fact that we have those, through the work that we have to do to get to our pathway to 100%, it shows that by having those distributed resources throughout the city, inside the city, that really, really helps with reliability, in addition to that in basin long duration generation capacity. But those components are extraordinarily important while also maintaining significant resources outside the city.
Galina, Nicole, or John, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. I actually wanted to quickly jump in here. So I think, you know, the events in Texas, right, to the credit of the grid operator there, you know, it could have been a lot more devastating had they allowed the weather to roll in, right, and just, let's say, fry a couple of transformers, which would have set a whole domino effect. And you know, what we need to, I think we're all aware that, you know, we're not in a position where if our infrastructure is fried, we won't be able to replace it for months and months and months on. And that could have, you know, a really life or death type of scenario that's cascaded, you know, on those communities. So one area I think that, you know, has already been partially rolled out across different utility territories and grid portions is smart metering, right? And kind of accelerating the rollout and the connectivity of those meters so that we can have a much more efficient way of looking at that network on a household by household basis. And then again, I think it goes back to deploying this a more distributed network of backup power, because these are, you know, these are solutions that we can deploy relatively quickly. I mean, I'm talking 6 to 8 months time frame, right? This is not something we need to wait grid scale for. And then, you know, decentralizing maybe some points of that infrastructure as well. So not just, you know, upgrade to transformers, but, you know, maybe having more decentralized points of control, so that, you know, you start to sort of slowly build out a little bit more of a microgrid scenario that can be isolated in these types of events.
I also wanted to flag on this point, and I also have the disclaimer that I'm still trying to catch up on all the scholarship about what happened in Texas. So I'm not going to pontificate as an expert on all aspects of what went wrong. But I will say that, you know, there are some success stories of folks who had solar and battery storage at their homes, and their homes turned into little community resiliency hubs, and folks in the neighborhood came to their house to plug in and take care of their needs. So it's just a signal that there needs to be greater integration of scaled rooftop solar, community solar, and battery storage. And what I'll also add is that contrary to what has become popular talking points about distributed energy resources, it's actually cheaper. It's the much more affordable approach to grid resiliency. And there's been a great paper that came out a little while ago by Vibrant Clean Energy that talked about how actually locally sited resources saves all ratepayers money in the kind of long run when we're talking about decarbonization. So I would just also encourage just a greater, more holistic approach to cost benefit assessments of how we move forward and avoid another Texas situation.
And Nicole, I think that to your point, I also saw anecdotally that people were using their EVs to power their homes in some cases, although it's not clear how much that was really happening. But you could certainly see that increase in the future. John?
Yeah, you had people actually sitting in their Teslas to keep warm because they could put the heater on in the Tesla, but they didn't have any heat in their house. Although again, we've got to consider low-income communities, and one of the issues in Texas is that because it's cheaper, and because in fact this is something that is installed in many of the low-income communities, the heating is electric heat. And so electric strip heating was used extensively and has been used extensively in Texas, but because of that, it put extreme loads and stresses on the system. So we have to put in, commensurate systems to ensure reliability and resilience, as Nicole was talking, like community solar, rooftop solar, and storage that has to go into these low-income communities. We have to ensure that these people have heating and have the capability, the infrastructure necessary to make their themselves comfortable in these extreme weather conditions. So when we're doing planning, we can't, planning can't get disconnected from the ultimate stress events that can happen in these areas. And one of the issues was too much electric heat. And as a result of it, it put a extreme stress on the grid. Another issue I'd like to talk about is, and I agree with Lauren that we really have to also harden our infrastructure, and that was and maintain it adequately. And as part of the problem in Texas, they did not harden for weather and have it sufficiently prepared. The natural gas infrastructure of natural gas generation, which was largely the cause of the blackouts in Texas, is about 30 gigawatts of natural gas didn't show up because it just wasn't sufficiently prepared for it. But we have to also look at not only the distributed energy resources that we can utilize to support the grid and support communities in these times of stress, but we also have to look at the interconnections, and Lauren's example of the transmission lines in California that outside Los Angeles that were in the fire. That's the exception. Usually transmission lines aren't issues in these times of stress and extreme weather events. The transmission lines usually stay up. And so if we can have strong interconnection throughout the country, we can have areas leaning on each other if one area is under stress. And that was the problem with Texas. Texas is not interconnected into the rest of the United States in a strong manner, and it needs to be. And I've been saying this for over 12 years, that Texas needs to join the nation and be part of the interconnected interstate grid. And if they were, there were actually thousands of megawatts that were available to import into Texas, but they didn't have the capability to import them into Texas and support the grid system down at the distribution level that they needed to.
Now, I want to go to a question from the audience from Namal, who is asked about infrastructure spending in the US compared to other countries. But I want to kind of turn it and say, there is a lot of talk about an infrastructure bill coming out of Congress in coming months. We've been celebrating Infrastructure Week every week for several years now, but there is the possibility that it might, actually happen this year. What would cities, I guess, what kind of spending would be best for cities to build the things that we're talking about? Where should the focus be? How do we make sure that the spending is equitable? And I want to invite any or all of you to jump in. Nicole, do you want to kick off?
Sure. So I've been in communication with a number of organizations led by environmental justice advocates and business owners of color in the clean energy space. And whether it's through the National Clean Energy Accelerator legislation, which might get folded into the big infrastructure bill, we're not sure, there is a strong interest in making sure that funds for whether it's energy retrofitting of buildings, which we really need in cities because of the housing stock, or funding for community solar projects or what have you, that business owners of color get access to those funds. And because what might happen is that there's a kind of a pot of money, and kind of the larger players get kind of first dibs at those funds. And so there is a growing, very vibrant, very expert community of business owners of color, environmental justice advocates who are serving their communities through renewable energy and energy efficiency projects. They want to make sure that they have a meaningful opportunity to get access to those funds and direct those funds to their communities. So I just wanted to highlight that.
For us, we're very excited and very hopeful about what might come our way, and we're trying to be ready to deploy, because there's so many opportunities for the mayor. It really is all under the banner of a green and equitable recovery. That all stimulus dollars, for us, he's called for there. There is no stimulus that is not a green stimulus. All stimulus dollars have to be spent in the name of drawing down greenhouse gas emissions through the investment in communities and investment in clean infrastructure. And so as it relates to the grid, there's so much there, because we've been talking a lot about power delivery for home and building end use. But as I mentioned before, and I think Galina, you talked a little bit about this, but there's also significant opportunity around transportation electrification and the infrastructure to support charging, as well as really looking at every building in the country as a shovel-ready project. Every building needs to be tightened. Every building really needs to be retrofitted, needs to be decarbonized. It is unhealthy to live and operate in a building that is burning fossil fuels. It is not good for your health. If we were regulating indoor air quality as we are burning natural gas furnaces and stoves and everything, it would not meet the standards of outdoor air quality standards. And so this is an incredibly important equity issue to make sure that people are living in healthy spaces that also can save them money. So you bring all of those things together. You bring decarbonization, you bring clean equipment with significant deep energy efficiency retrofits, so that and the distributed rooftop solar, all of those things coming together really provide a package of savings and health to people in those buildings. Those are all jobs. Those are all good investments that have a payback, and they all also help the grid be more stable.
Jon or Galina?
Yes, I actually wanted to add a little bit, shed a little bit of light, I guess, from the other side of the coin here, having applied in the past for funding, for our various projects, electrification of transport and other sustainability projects. To the degree that's I guess possible within our political framework, I think funding needs to be continuous and a more stable across the board, right? As we've seen sort of with the early days of solar, when funding was cut, many companies went under. And so we obviously don't want a repeat of that same situation with the variety of these innovative projects. So I think there has to be also a balancing act of the amount of stimulus that goes out and the time frame for which that funding is accessible to the private sector, so that it sort of works out on both sides of the equation.
Jon, do you want to jump in?
Well, yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with Nicole and Lauren about, the funding for distributed resources and targeting communities of color and ensuring that we can, look at buildings as, the first place that we really need to invest, but there's going to be larger infrastructure investments as well for transmission and the larger grid. But we need to do that in a way that also doesn't disadvantage low-income communities in sense of citing these resources through their communities as it has in the past in very negative ways. And you can look at the freeways in Brooklyn and other things that we've seen that have gone through these communities and just torn them up. Ultimately, we have to be smarter about citing these types of large infrastructure projects. For example, using existing right-of-ways of railroads to put transmission lines where we can actually underground them along a railroad and would not disrupt anyone in that sense. So we have to be smarter, more efficient, more effective in these larger infrastructure projects. And again, don't just cite them in low-income areas that may seem easiest for us, and because we can't repeat those tragedies of the past.
Now, we only have a few minutes left. We certainly could have scheduled this for another hour or even longer. But I want to get at a question that came in that's kind of focused on, so my program at the Aspen Institute, we run a summit called the Future Leaders Climate Summit. And so it's a group of 18 to 30-year-olds who are kind of early in their career in the energy, environment, climate space. And so a question came in of, what advice do you have for people who want to jumpstart their career in this area, working with green cities, working in the environmental space, and what do you think is most critical to kind of that early career part? So I guess Lauren, do you want to go first?
Sure, and I tried to give a little bit of early thought in writing too in the Q&A, but this is a really exciting time because we're at a moment where it feels like everyone is really rowing in the same direction in the United States, and or at least a lot more people are really rowing in the same direction. It used to be that for a short period of time we had an exciting moment where the federal government and states and cities were moving. That was coming after a period where that wasn't happening. We've been flipping back and forth. But now, as this administration has come in, the Biden-Harris administration has come in swinging, that this is a top priority, that marrying all the things that we're talking about together, that marrying economic security, long-term economic security for everyone with a healthy, sustainable planet. That's an incredible opportunity. So in some ways, I kind of feel like we're at a moment where you can't go wrong if you want to, go to DC or be in DC and work at the national level. If you want to move into what I have in my career increasingly kind of gone from the international work all the way down to local government, which I can tell you I never thought I was going to do. But even at the local level, it has afforded the opportunity to continue to work at all of those scales and really feel immediate impacts and understand better and better with every step along the way, understand better and better the importance of understanding the local community level context in which we are working in order to develop and implement sustainable, as in like enduring, long-lasting solutions that work for people. That has been, in terms of my career pursuit and understanding of how important it is to be locked into that value set. And so whatever you choose, make sure that you're thinking back to that connection is so incredibly important. And then you can apply that to sustainable finance. You can apply that to clean tech startup field. You can apply that to even the smart data, smart city, kind of platforms, because they all relate together. And there's so many opportunities that carry those threads. And it's really about integrating an interdisciplinary approach to any of those, any of the career choices that one might make.
Jon.
Yeah, Greg, thanks. I started out at the local level. I actually started in the district attorney's office in Washoe County, Nevada, northern Nevada. but not as a prosecutor. I was in the civil division and really started out with respect to codes and standards and issues related to buildings and related to the infrastructure in the city. And, I think it's a great level for someone who wants to really get into this to start, public service and, at the local level, I think is really a great way to really get the picture on the ground of what people need and what, people's really, requirements are and how to help people fulfill those. So I would really encourage people to go at the city or county level and try to work with their city or county governments as a place to begin.
Nicole?
I absolutely echo everything that Lauren and Jon has shared about that. All politics is local, and that is very, very true. I also want to, a lot of times you have young people asking, what steps should I take to pursue a career in sustainability? But I want to also just honor and thank all of the young people in our country who have been such dynamic thought leaders and activists in this space and who have really moved the ball forward on climate resilience during times when kind of the elders in the community weren't all that excited to hear from them. And they were persistent. And now much of what they've worked on is now our national policy, or going to be soon, hopefully. Young people have a lot of power, and they should feel confident in that and continue to work in their community to make things better for their neighbors.
Galina?
Yeah, I was just going to say, love everything that the co-panelists have mentioned. And I think the local aspect is super important. And from a technology side, there's a number of really, really awesome technologies that we can experiment with. And, the future leaders need to experiment with today. And it's vehicle to grid technologies, right? The ability, we're growing this massive network of electric vehicles, and these could act as distributed storage and capacitors as well. There is, a play for IoT and having just a better, more digitally integrated infrastructure. And I think these types of projects can, I encourage, young leaders sort of to start these types of projects at a local level and test them out. And then we can easily replicate, into other areas and expand that. But I think, more than ever, there's also this innovation and technology component to this that, there's just so much to experiment with and to bring forth from that angle. And lastly, I would just mention, the continuous the network effect of educating your peers on carbon footprint, carbon calorie, so we can, accelerate this transition with the generations that are coming.
Excellent. Well, we barely scratched the surface and we're now out of time. So I wanted to thank each of our 4 panelists for participating today, and everyone for tuning in. This is going to live on our YouTube channel, and we'll make sure to send that out to everybody and push it out through our social media channels. So thanks for everyone joining us today, and we'll see you all soon.